What happens when a homeless man, charged with trespassing, reveals a secret that stops Judge Frank Caprio dead in his tracks? The shocking truth hidden beneath this man's torn jacket will leave you speechless and prove that sometimes life's cruelest twists create the most powerful stories of human resilience. This isn't just another courtroom case. This is the moment Judge Caprio discovered that the man standing before him had once sat in the same position he now occupied, behind a judge's bench making life-changing decisions. But what brought this former federal prosecutor to rock bottom, and what Judge Caprio does when he learns the devastating truth, will restore your faith in humanity forever. I'm warning you right now, this story will break your heart and then rebuild it stronger than before. When Judge Caprio realizes who he's really talking to, his response becomes the most powerful moment ever captured in Providence Municipal Court. But before we dive into this incredible true story, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button, because less than 3% of you watching are actually subscribed, and stories like this deserve to reach everyone. And comment below, have you ever lost everything and had to start over? Because what you're about to witness proves that rock bottom can become the foundation for something extraordinary. It's a gray Tuesday morning in November, and Providence Municipal Court is handling its usual rotation of traffic violations and minor infractions. Judge Frank Caprio, now in his 80s, reviews his morning docket with the same careful attention he's brought to every case for over 3 decades. The courtroom buzzes with familiar energy, defendants nervously checking their phones, attorneys shuffling through paperwork, and court staff preparing for another day under Judge Caprio's compassionate leadership. At exactly 9:47 a.m., something unusual catches everyone's attention. Through the heavy courthouse doors shuffles a man who immediately stands out from the typical defendants. He's thin, weathered by exposure to the elements, wearing layers of mismatched clothing that tell the story of someone living on the streets. His gray hair is unkempt, his beard patchy, and he carries a worn backpack that appears to contain everything he owns. But here's what makes him different, and this detail will become crucial to understanding what happens next. Despite his obvious homelessness, this man moves with a certain dignity. His posture, though bent by hardship, still carries traces of someone who once commanded respect. And when he removes his torn baseball cap as he enters the courtroom, the gesture is performed with an almost ceremonial reverence that speaks to deep-seated respect for the judicial process. And the man's name is Thomas Richardson, though most people on the street simply call him Professor, a nickname whose origin will soon shock everyone in that courtroom. He's here because 3 days ago, security guards found him sleeping in the lobby of the federal building downtown. The charge: criminal trespassing. The potential penalty: up to 30 days in jail. But guys, before I tell you what Judge Caprio discovers about this man's incredible past, I want you to think about something. Comment below, when you see someone experiencing homelessness, what assumptions do you make about their background? Because what you're about to learn will shatter every stereotype you've ever had. As Thomas approaches the defendant's table, Judge Caprio immediately notices something that sets him apart from most people facing trespassing charges. Despite his rough appearance, Thomas carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone familiar with courtroom proceedings. He doesn't fidget nervously or avoid eye contact. Instead, he stands straight, makes direct eye contact with the judge, and waits respectfully to be addressed. Shortly after the judge finishes his direct jurisdiction, Thomas courteously stands up, then waits respectfully to be addressed. Thomas Richardson, the court clerk announces, consulting the morning's docket, charged with criminal trespassing at the federal building on November 15th. Judge Caprio looks up from his paperwork, and immediately something about this defendant captures his attention. It's not just the man's dignity in the face of obvious hardship. It's something more subtle. The way he stands, the careful attention he pays to courtroom protocol, the almost unconscious way he positions himself at exactly the right distance from the bench. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio begins, his voice carrying its characteristic warmth. You're charged with trespassing. Before we proceed, can you help me understand what happened on November 15th? Thomas takes a deep breath, and when he speaks, his voice carries something unexpected, the measured cadence of someone accustomed to addressing courts, not as a defendant, but as an advocate. Your Honor, I was seeking shelter from the rain in the federal building lobby. I understand that I violated the building's occupancy rules, and I take full responsibility for my actions. I was not causing any disturbance, nor was I under the influence of any substances. I was simply trying to stay dry during a particularly severe storm. The scorn of eloquence of his response stops Judge Caprio mid-note. This isn't the typical explanation from someone charged with trespassing. The formal structure, the precise legal language, the respectful acknowledgement of wrongdoing while providing context, it all suggests someone with significant legal training. And that's when Judge Caprio does something that surprises everyone in the courtroom. He sets down his pen completely and looks directly at Thomas with the intense curiosity that has made him famous for seeing beyond surface appearances. Mr. Richardson, forgive me for asking, but you speak like someone familiar with legal proceedings. Do you have experience with the court system? The question hangs in the air like a challenge, and Thomas Richardson's entire demeanor shifts. For a moment, the weathered homeless man standing before the bench transforms into someone else entirely, someone who once held power, commanded respect, and made decisions that affected people's lives. But here's where the story takes a turn that will leave you absolutely speechless. Comment below right now, what do you think Thomas's background really is? Because what he reveals next shocked Judge Caprio so much that he had to take a 5-minute recess to process what he'd just heard. Thomas looks around the packed courtroom, at the defendants waiting their turn, at the court staff who've heard thousands of cases. His voice becomes quieter, more personal, as he prepares to share a truth he's kept hidden for 3 years. Your Honor, I have some experience with legal proceedings. I was a federal prosecutor for 15 years. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1989 and served as an assistant United States attorney for the District of Massachusetts until 2019. The silence that follows is deafening. Every person in that courtroom stops what they're doing. Court reporters pause their typing. Other defendants forget their own nervousness. Even the bailiff straightens up in surprise. Judge Caprio's eyes widen with a mixture of shock and disbelief. He's presided over thousands of cases, met people from every walk of life, but he has never encountered a homeless defendant who was once a federal prosecutor. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio says, slowly, did you say you were a federal prosecutor? Yes, Your Honor, I specialized in white-collar crime and public corruption cases. I prosecuted some of the largest financial fraud cases in Massachusetts history. The revelation sends ripples through the courtroom. A federal prosecutor, someone who once wielded enormous power in the justice system, now stands as a defendant, charged with the kind of minor offense he once would have dismissed without a second thought. But Judge Caprio's instincts tell him there's much more to this story. Federal prosecutors don't typically end up homeless unless something catastrophic happened. And what Thomas reveals next about the devastating chain of events that brought him to this moment will make you understand why Judge Caprio's response becomes legendary. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio continues, his voice filled with genuine concern, can you help me understand how someone with your background and training ended up in this situation? Thomas takes another deep breath, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, his composed facade begins to crack slightly. The pain of whatever brought him to this point is clearly still raw, still devastating. Your Honor, my fall from grace began in 2019 when my son was diagnosed with leukemia. He was 12 years old. The emotional weight of those words hits everyone in the courtroom immediately. Parents in the gallery instinctively think of their own children. Judge Caprio, himself a father and grandfather, feels his heart sink as he begins to understand the trajectory of Thomas's story. And guys, if this story is already hitting you emotionally, hit that like button right now, because what Thomas reveals next about the impossible choice he faced will break your heart and show you exactly how far a parent will go to save their child. The treatment required was experimental and not covered by insurance, Thomas continues, his voice becoming more strained. The cost was approximately $400,000, 0 cents. As a federal prosecutor, I earned a good salary, but nothing close to what was needed for his treatment. Judge Caprio leans forward, fully invested in understanding this man's journey from federal courthouse to homeless shelter. Mr. Richardson, what did you do? I liquidated everything, Your Honor, my retirement fund, my children's college savings. I took out a second mortgage on our home. But it still wasn't enough. The treatment center required payment up front, and time was running out. The courtroom is completely silent now, everyone hanging on every word of this devastating story. That's when I made the decision that cost me everything, Thomas says, his voice barely above a whisper. I accepted money from a defendant in one of my cases, $50,000 in exchange for recommendations for reduced sentencing. The confession hits like lightning. Thomas Richardson hadn't just fallen from grace, he had compromised everything he'd sworn to uphold as a prosecutor. But the reason why makes his story one of the most heartbreaking examples of parental desperation ever heard in a courtroom. But wait, there's more to this story that will absolutely shock you. Because what happened to Thomas' son and how his sacrifice ultimately affected his family creates a twist that no one saw coming. Don't skip ahead, because the details matter for understanding why Judge Caprio's response becomes the most powerful moment of justice and redemption you'll ever witness. Judge Caprio processes this revelation with the wisdom of someone who's spent decades understanding human nature at its most vulnerable. He recognizes that Thomas Richardson represents one of the cruelest dilemmas a parent can face, choosing between personal integrity and a child's life. Mr. Richardson, what happened after you accepted the money? The FBI discovered the payment during a routine investigation of the defendant's financial records. I was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. I lost my law license, my pension, my home, and my family's respect. Thomas pauses, struggling with the next part of his story. But the cruelest irony, Your Honor, is that despite everything I sacrificed, despite destroying my career and my integrity, my son died 6 months into his treatment. The experimental therapy failed. The emotional impact of this revelation is overwhelming. Every person in that courtroom understands they're witnessing the complete destruction of a man who gave up everything for love, only to lose the very person he was trying to save. Judge Caprio's eyes fill with tears as he grasps the full scope of Thomas's tragedy. This man didn't just lose his career, he lost his son, his family, his home, and his identity, all in pursuit of a hope that ultimately proved false. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio says quietly, what happened to your family after your son's death? My wife couldn't forgive me for the choices I made. She felt that I had destroyed not just my own life, but our daughter's future as well. She divorced me while I was in prison and moved across the country with our surviving child. I haven't spoken to either of them in 3 years. The complete picture of Thomas Richardson's fall is now clear. Federal prosecutor to felon, father to stranger, homeowner to homeless. A series of impossible choices made out of love that resulted in the loss of everything he held dear. But here's what makes this story even more incredible and why Judge Caprio's response will be remembered forever. Because what Thomas tells him next reveals a strength of character that prison couldn't break and homelessness couldn't destroy. Judge Caprio, visibly moved by Thomas's story, takes a moment to compose himself before continuing. Mr. Richardson, in the 3 years since your release from prison, how have you survived? I've been living in shelters and on the streets, Your Honor. I work odd jobs when I can find them. Cleaning, manual labor, anything that doesn't require a background check. Most employers won't hire a former federal prosecutor convicted of corruption. And the night you were arrested for trespassing, why were you specifically at the federal building? Thomas's answer reveals something beautiful about human nature that will restore your faith in redemption and second chances. Your Honor, I go there sometimes because it reminds me of who I used to be. Not the corrupt prosecutor who took bribes, but the man who believed in justice. I sit in that lobby and I remember cases where I helped victims get justice, where I put away people who hurt others. Judge Caprio realizes that Thomas Richardson hasn't just been seeking physical shelter, he's been seeking spiritual shelter in the memory of the good he once did. Mr. Richardson, do you regret the choice you made to accept that money? Every day, Your Honor. Not because of what it cost me, but because I betrayed everything I swore to uphold. I became the kind of person I spent my career prosecuting. Thomas looks directly at Judge Caprio with eyes that have seen the absolute bottom of human experience. But if I'm being completely honest, Your Honor, if I could go back and my son was dying again, I would probably make the same choice. Because being his father was more important to me than being a prosecutor. And that's when Judge Caprio does something that breaks every rule of courtroom protocol and creates a moment that will be shared millions of times across social media. What he does next proves that sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about understanding the difference between legal guilt and moral complexity. Judge Caprio stands up slowly and walks around his bench, approaching Thomas at the defendant's table. Every person in the courtroom holds their breath as they realize they are about to witness something unprecedented. Mr. Richardson, Judge Caprio says, his voice filled with emotion, I want you to know that I've been on this bench for over 30 years. I've seen every kind of case, heard every kind of excuse, and met every kind of person. But I have never encountered someone who sacrificed as much for love as you have. The judge looks directly into Thomas's eyes. You made a terrible choice as a prosecutor. You violated your oath and betrayed the public trust. Those are facts that can't be changed. But you made that choice as a father, trying to save his dying child. And that context doesn't excuse your actions, but it explains them in a way that transforms how we understand justice. Judge Caprio turns toward the packed gallery. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a man who lost everything. His career, his freedom, his family, his home, and ultimately his son, because he chose love over law. That doesn't make his choice right, but it makes him human. The judge returns his attention to Thomas. Mr. Richardson, regarding the trespassing charge, I'm dismissing it completely. You are seeking shelter during a storm. You caused no disruption, and you've already paid a price that far exceeds anything this court could impose. The courtroom erupts in applause. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. But more than that, I want to offer you something else. My court needs someone with legal experience to help other defendants understand their rights and navigate the system. It's a volunteer position, but it comes with a small stipend and, more importantly, a chance to use your legal knowledge to help people again. Thomas Richardson, the former federal prosecutor turned homeless defendant, breaks down completely. For the first time in 3 years, someone has seen past his mistakes to the man underneath. Your Honor, Thomas manages through tears, I would be honored to serve this court in any capacity. And guys, what happened next will prove that sometimes rock bottom becomes the foundation for the most beautiful comebacks. Because Thomas Richardson's story didn't end in that courtroom. It was just beginning. 6 months later, Thomas Richardson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom not as a defendant, but as a volunteer legal advocate. He had found stable housing, reconnected with his daughter, and begun the long process of rebuilding his life. But the most incredible part? Using his experience as both prosecutor and defendant, Thomas helped hundreds of people navigate the legal system with compassion and understanding that only someone who had lost everything could provide. Judge Caprio's decision to show mercy instead of judgment didn't just change Thomas's life. It created a ripple effect that touched every person who benefited from Thomas's second chance at serving justice. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about redemption and second chances, then you need to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to this channel, because we're documenting the moments that prove our justice system can still show compassion. Second, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that mistakes don't define us forever. And third, comment below, do you believe in second chances, even for people who've made terrible choices for the right reasons? Thomas Richardson proved that the greatest tragedy isn't falling down, it's staying down. And Judge Frank Caprio proved that true justice sometimes requires seeing the person behind the crime and responding with wisdom instead of just law. Sometimes the people who've fallen the furthest have the most to teach us about rising again.